Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 228, Heart Trauma, if you're reading Jamini's box. Yeah, alright, cool. Guys, this is coming up Saturday morning. My Friday got out of control. It was one of those days. It was a long day, and I was also dealing with a lot of copyright issues. On that note, if anyone's waiting for those anime videos, I'm just fixing some things with copyright. Ideally, Shield Hero and Kenja will be out today, but copyrights, it's been weird. I'll tell you guys more about that during those actual videos. Anyway, let's get into the chapter. Okay, so the big points I want to say about this chapter, just reading it, I find the chapter kind of weird. Just with a few little things, not weird in a bad way, just weird in a curious way. So that's what we're gonna pretty much be talking about, specifically the part that I found to be interesting and weird. And also I feel like this chapter might be a turning point chapter, just in the case of Twice. As you see, Twice is getting recruited by the Liberation Army. That's interesting. The reason it's going to be a turning point chapter is because if Twice overcomes this, we have a pretty good idea of the narrative. If Twice doesn't overcome this and actually gets kidnapped, then again, the narrative is going in another direction. So that's why I think it's a turning point chapter. It's different than Toga either winning or losing. This might have bigger ramifications for the rest of the story, and we'll get into that fully. So that's going to be just the general idea. We're going to talk about those two big parts first, and then I'll go through the chapter just page by page and see if there's anything else that's worth talking about. Okay, so last week I thought we were going to be heading into the Dobby portion of the character arc for him, or the Dobby portion of the arc for Dobby. But this week we saw that we didn't. We ended up going into Dobby. Then we used Mr. Compress for a transition, and then we went full into the Twice chapter, which honestly very interesting. I liked how the author did all those things. It's probably because the Dobby one needs a little bit more time to marinate. It needs more time to be there. I'm sure we're gonna get it later, so that's all cool. And honestly, Twice is already a very interesting character, so this was just good. And he did set up Twice for whatever Twice is gonna be doing. Like him going after Toga makes sense when you consider everything. So within Twice, the biggest interesting thing is that whole thing with him joining the Liberation Army. The reason, as I said before, I said it could be a turning point. The reason it's such a distinct turning point is because right now, when I'm reading this, I'm kind of reading this as that thing that shonen series do, where they have their characters facing off against a group of enemies one by one, and each character gets to have the little moment to either show off their power or their character develop. Like, the biggest example of that, when I just think of it, the Sasuke retrieval arc, that was a series of characters having their moments to shine and getting developed along the way. The Naruto versus all those people, or Neji, Shoji, or even from Yu Yu Hakusho, when the group goes and they're like climbing a tower, and at some point Kuwabara fights a giant tiger. I think it was based on the four beasts of Chinese culture. Point is, that's what I'm kind of seeing here. It's just this situation where in this case, the villains are our protagonistic characters, and they are facing off against enemies and getting their little spotlights. And when you see what's gone on so far with Toga, she's effectively fitting the mold of that general arc. So that's what I kind of see here. If this is going to be the moment for Twice to shine, then if we end up getting a situation where Twice overcomes his past trauma, because Skeptic effectively sets it up. He sets it up that Twice has significant trauma. So he's already done the premising. If the author goes through and has Twice overcome it, then we can say, well, we are very much in the rough outline of that kind of arc, like the Sasuke retrieval arc, and that one arc in Yu Yu Hakusho where people are climbing that tower, I think. I just don't remember what it's called. We are in that kind of arc, with maybe a few wrinkles here and there, because we know that the Hero Academia author does apply a few wrinkles to the implementation of any kind of archetype or any kind of general story outline. So if we get that, it's pretty certain that a lot of the other villains are going to get that kind of treatment. If Twice gets pulled away, well, now we're heading more towards that whole the villains are, or the villain league, villain alliance is falling apart. And in that reality, it's it's just working closer towards that goal, and that's interesting. But as you guys know, I think there's a fake out. I think the author is going to use some kind of trick to say, oh yeah, today the villain alliance, sorry, the villain league kind of imploded, it blew up, but in the ashes came out the bigger villain conglomerate. I don't know. I'm just expecting that the author is just playing around with words instead of actually going for a true the villains got wiped out type scenario. So those are the two kind of points we're at here. It's either we're getting that archetype, or sorry, that overview of arcs where it's just characters getting spotlights one after another during fights, or we're going into the fall of the villains and the author actually is going to get rid of the villain alliance, or it's just going to complicate things and make Twice a damsel in distress. Very two different tones though if we're ever going into either of those points. So I'm very interested in that. Now the other thing that I found very weird about this chapter is that the way people are speaking about Redestro, it's kind of odd. So I'm going to bring you up two examples. One example being what Skeptic said real quick. I'll just read out for you in case you can't see it on the video. With your special ability, Redestro can be revived no matter what happens to him. We won't let the tragedy of Destro repeat itself. Okay, that was one. And then let me grab up the other because it's a little bit away. Right. It was when the Ice Boy was saying something, and I'll just read that one for you as well. I have been holding my special ability for years. Instead of attending school, I've been training far longer than those heroes have. The Supreme Leader gave me power. Alright, so those two lines, I feel like there's something weird happening here, especially that the Supreme Leader gave them power. It's kind of weird. You know, my first knee-jerk reaction, I'm thinking, is Redestro able to mess around with people's quirks? I'm thinking, is this an all for one, maybe a downgrade of all for one's power to some degree? It's just, you have Skeptic on one side talking about how the guy isn't using it properly, and then like you know, Redestro getting the benefits of Twice's quirk, and then you have the other guy flat out saying the guy gave him power. It's very vague. If we are trying to be critical with what we know in the chapter so far, or what we know from this character so far, the guy has support equipment. He gave Curious support equipment. Maybe when they say power, they mean support equipment, knowledge, experience, mentoring. Maybe that's what they mean, or maybe they mean like quite literally there's some quirk tomfoolery going on. Now I think it would be better if, well, we got the first solution, just because I think that makes Redestro just a little bit more different than the standard villains. Although if he ends up with that, with a quirk being the reason why people are getting power, I would expect that the author would still just kind of change, well, the implementation of the quirk. So maybe you could see like you have a talk about the distinctions between quirk bestowing abilities and compare it. So there's some value there, but I think the first option gives more value to the character. And honestly, given what we've seen so far, I mean, Curious, she did effectively use her job when she went after Toga. Like, she was very much following her as like an exaggerated form of reporting. She did follow that motif really well. And she did also have an upgrade in the form of the support equipment. So that's already one big strike there, telling you, okay, like, it's probably they're referring to the resources that this man can give. But because we don't know his quirk, still kind of a question mark. On the other side, just to like dive a little bit into what Skeptic was saying, I think the premise is interesting, saying that special ability would be really nice for Destro to have. But I wonder in practicality, how would that work? Because we know that the clones themselves have a time limit. Or is he saying that either Twice has an upgrade waiting to happen that Twice hasn't realized, but this guy has theorized? Or is he saying that we can just have Redestro hiding in a back room the same way All For One was hiding, and then just have clone Redestro going out into the public and talking? Is that what he's saying? I wonder. In that second case, I think we need more information, because I'm still a little bit underwhelmed. It might be a mixture of both options for that, honestly. Interesting stuff, though. So those are the big thoughts that I have for this chapter. Let's dive in page by page and see if we can spot any little thing. And I guess the first real page that I thought had something worthwhile was The page with Dobby versus Ice Boy. The reason I'm pointing this one out is because there was a part where they were talking about Dobby being the wielder of blue flames and the only one in the league capable of AoE attacks. Now this might be a translation artifact or just translation gone wrong, but AoE is a gamer term, and I'm just wondering if this guy is kind of like Shigaraki in that he's got a lot of gaming experience. I wonder if that's how he kind of sees the world. Like, this guy's already a person who has a barrier between us and him, right? We can't see his face. He's a mysterious character. If he has like, well, not as popular habits, or just if he was like a recluse and he played video games, I think that would make sense because he's already talking in gamer terms. It's just I don't know where that translation came from, so I can't say anything there. It might be something to keep an eye out, because if he keeps using gamer terms, then we are dealing with this kind of character that we could expect has a bit of a shut-in lifestyle. Might be a thing. Otherwise, the big thing with that little part there was also that it just shows you how much information these guys are collecting. And it's actually really interesting with the way the author did it. The enemy at the beginning and the enemy at the end, they end up starting some of the same kind of questions. And I think that's very interesting. I think it's purposeful on the author's part. So good on him for the writing on that one. It's like a bookend. The guy starts off with talking about superpowers. The guy at the end makes allusions to superpowers, or like something that Destro can do. Very interesting. The next big bit for me is, the bit where the guy summons the giant, ice dragon, I guess. Now, the way that we saw it happening in the manga, you had all these ice packs coming towards him and being formed. I think that's an interesting idea, but I don't know if a town has enough ice to create what this kid is creating. It looks pretty cool, though. I'm pretty happy to see this power out there. But I wouldn't be surprised if this kid is also pulling ice crystals from the atmosphere. I would assume that there's ice crystals at a higher altitude. And given the amount of reach that this guy has, I wouldn't be surprised if he can pull them down from the sky. One big thing that he also brought up here is that he's been training for longer than heroes have. I think that's a little bit of a pride thing. I think that's a little bit of this guy he has legitimately trained for a long time. And he is taking pride in that. But like, when you think about people like Mirio, when you think about people in UA, I feel like this guy might be on the level of the UA students in terms of how much training he's had. But if he's older than a student, and we assume that he went through like the same kind of rigorous things that the UA students went through in general, he's coming out as a UA alumni. I feel like that's kind of the level of his quirk, if we were just to estimate. So I would say that the big point of that line is to just tell you that this guy is pretty much on the level of a UA pro hero. Pretty much telling you that this guy, the same way that other people have really developed their quirks, this guy has developed his quirk. Like, his quirk is at the opposite end of where the villains' quirks are. Like, the villains have largely untested quirks because they don't really have the same training rigors as UA until they went up against Gigantomachia. That's why they're able to grow at such explosive rates. But this guy is saying, like, hey, I'm at the tip top. I'm at the cream of the crop. That's what I take away from that line that the author gave us with that character. So I am interested to see how this fire versus ice fight goes. Now, after that, we do go into that little bit with Mr. Compress. And I think this was really good because this served as the transition part. You have a moment, you have the fire going out, you have Mr. Compress showing up, and then he segues into Twice. That was pretty good. That was smooth. I liked it. If this wasn't there, it would have given the chapter a choppy feeling. This is really good. Good on the author for doing that. That was a very simple call and response. Love it. When we go into the Twice part, now this part, I think it's where the majority of the emotion lies. And so one of the first things that I'm seeing, I guess Toga and Twice, they have a very interesting relationship. They've always have a very interesting relationship. Twice and Toga's relationship, I think, in the villains, aside from the relationships that Shigaraki has with the other villain members, I think theirs is the most defined and developed. Specifically because Toga's kind to Twice. So seeing that kindness come back, it all makes sense. This all feels very organic, and this all makes sense with what Twice's whole character is about. He likes the villains. He likes that he has somewhere to belong. That's very good. So seeing it here, I'm all for it. Like, personally, I think a Toga Twice ship, most likely. I think the author's pushing for it. Like, you've seen the cover pages for Toga and Twice. I feel like Toga's older than the high school girl by this point too, so fingers crossed for that. Anyway, we're here. Twice is also having his little yes-no kind of response. I'm wondering if that's because the stress of the situation is just kind of unhinging him a little bit more, or if it's because his mask is torn. It just seems way more aggressive than it usually is. It's probably because he's stressed. I feel because of the stress, it's kind of tearing him apart a little bit more. Anyway, everything with Twice and Toga, it's just further reiterating and further reminding the viewers, like, hey, this has been a thing that's been there for a long time. It makes sense that Twice is freaking out over Toga. And it's also very nice that Twice kept the handkerchief. That's so kind. That's so nice. Oh, Twice is adorable, man. Now from there, we're moving across, and now we're getting Skeptic involved. The next page that I found very interesting was where Skeptic was narrating Twice's ability, special ability double. In some ways, it's the exact opposite of Toga. So that's really interesting, because if the author is having a character there, it's because the author played with that idea in his head. The reason I find that interesting is because, you know, I never really thought of it like that. I look at them and it's like, the way I would think it, you know, you have Toga, who is able to become someone else, and you have Twice, who is able to make more of someone else. Pretty interesting. Like, you know, like I wouldn't call them exact opposites at that point, but I do see like there is that kind of relationship between them. Now I would say like Toga, even though she becomes other people, she's able to maintain her very strong sense of identity, which is something that, well, Twice isn't able to do, even though he's making more copies of himself. So there is that kind of irony, and there is that kind of contrast between the two, that Toga, in spite of becoming so many different people, is still very sure of who she is, whereas Twice, who made so many copies of himself, is not sure of who he is. That's a very interesting distinction, and I would see it there. I do wonder if the author saw that being the opposite, and I do wonder if this contrast in abilities and personality is why the author made Toga and Twice work so well together. Why these two are the ones that are together more often than not. I think it's very interesting. I think it's good on the author. I think this is like good writing. I'm happy that the author pointed this out, because I wouldn't have thought about it otherwise. One thing I do want to say along with this is that I think that there is a bit of a sub-theme of identity going on. Like last week, I think we talked about just the religious undertones, or the different kinds of evils going on in this arc, but now I'm thinking this arc also has a big message about identity for the villains. Because think about it, we started with Spinner having an identity that caused a lot of persecution and him adopting the ideals of staying into his identity. Then you had Toga, whose opponent pretty much questioned who she was this whole time, and Toga had to reaffirm who she was. And now you have Twice, who has these identity problems. He's being attacked by a lot of his doubles, pretty much, is what Skeptic is doing. And it's ultimately, again, if Twice overcomes this, he's overcoming a problem of identity. And then Shigaraki himself, well, he's kind of right now in a point where he's he's playing around with his past memories, which would inform him of his identity. I think there's an identity theme in these chapters. It's very interesting, because if we are playing identity, that means that if Mr. Compress gets his little spotlight, he's going to be talking about who he is. And that's interesting, because we don't know much about him. If Dobby gets his spotlight, that one's the tricky one, because we don't know if the author wants to give that away yet. So I think Mr. Compress will be the clincher. If Mr. Compress's little spotlight turns into talking about why he is the way he is and who he is, then we do know we are in a solid identity discovery arc for the villains. Which is important, because they have, well, it's good for us because we need to know more about them, and it's good for the villains because Twice is there. Anyway, next bit is, of course, the Twice panel. The thing that I want to point out here is that it is strange that this person knows all of this. He knows that Twice multiplied himself. He knows that Twice was killed by himself. That's weird information for him to know. So my first question is, he's a tech guru. Does he have all the villains bugged? Has he had everyone bugged for a very long time? Or I think the more realistic approach, did Twice go to counseling? Did those files go onto a record and this guy accessed the record? I think that's more possible than this guy listening in on the villains at all times and extracting this information, because otherwise how does he have this information? It's weird. What do you guys think? Let me know, because it's kind of weird. Now that guy Skeptic, I think he is using the most of his non-villainous resume. So I'm very happy with that. It's just that this guy also has such a degree of information that it's kind of like how. The next panel I want to point out is this panel of Twice running away from the crowd of people. Now just look at all the faces here. I think that the author really likes drawing hands, because that's one thing that's really popping out here. There's a lot of hands in this particular panel, and this kind of reminds me of the panel from last week where it's just crowds of people going after someone. And it's just, I think the author really likes this imagery. I think he's really gone into it, and I think this is one of my favorites, because if you look at Twice and the way he's drawn, there's just a level of weakness that is here, and there is also that kind of level of beauty in that he's being attacked by all of his, well, doppelgangers. I love it, man. I love this sense of vulnerability. This panel is really doing a lot for me. Also, look at this guy. What is this guy doing? He looks like a model, or he looks like, yeah. Okay. Good panel, great panel overall. Finally, I guess the last thing I really want to say is Skeptic. He can turn any human-sized object into a puppet that he can control at will. The wording's a little bit unclear for me. Is he saying that, you know, if he touches a refrigerator, does that refrigerator become the shape of a human? Or are these people that he's using, are they just like dummies that he had made with all his money? So he made copies of Twice. And since they're human-sized, he can control them. I wonder if that's what they're trying to say. So that's a big question for me. Is he turning human-sized objects to look like humans, or is he using dummies? That's my question mark. Anyway, that's overall all the notes I had for the chapter. Lots of really cool stuff. I'm really enjoying it. Guys, let me know what you thought down below. And yeah, we're there. Till next time. Oh, wait, I got one note. If there happens to be fan artists in the comments watching this video, I know it's a very long video, but if you're there, please, if you would like me to like showcase some of your art for videos or something like that, if you want your arts just to be featured in the videos at the end of videos, or maybe for thumbnails, if you would be so gracious to allow me that honor of showing them off for people on the internet, let me know. Just because I need to get better thumbnails, and a big part of that is, you know, having better art for the thumbnails. So if anyone wants to help along with that, like I'll try to make it something that's mutually beneficial to some degree. I'm not really I don't really like doing things in an unfair way for fan artists. So just let me know down below if you got fan art. Like, link your social medias, link your DeviantArt or whatever else, and we can talk about it through comments or something. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.